It's 1986. The Cold War is cooling down, and in China, the iron rice bowl means a safe job for life. But in a damp workshop in Hunan, a quiet mutiny was welding itself together. A mutiny that would eventually shatter the hierarchy of the industrial world. While the country was asleep, 4 friends quit their government jobs to challenge the state-backed giants that ruled the East. We call them the Basement Four. Armed with nothing but scrap metal and sheer audacity, they engaged in a brutal corporate civil war, defined by wiretaps, kidnapping attempts, and midnight escapes. They didn't just survive the fight, they conquered it. They overtook Caterpillar, they bought the German masters they once copied, and they're likely the only private company in history to sue a US president and win. This is the untold story of the Iron King of the East. To understand the risk here, you have to look at China in 1986. Back then, a job wasn't just a paycheck, it was the iron rice bowl. You had housing, medical, and a pension until you died. Walking away from that wasn't just risky, people thought you were insane. But that's exactly what Liang Wengen and his 3 buddies, Tang, Mao, and Yuan, did. They called it Xiahai, jumping into the sea. It's a fancy way of saying they left the state's protection to become unmanaged persons. No safety net, sink or swim. They didn't do it just for the cash, they wanted to modernize the industry. But patriotism doesn't keep the lights on, and reality hit hard. The group went back to Liang's home turf, Maotang village. You need local connections, Guanji, to survive in rural business. They scraped together about 60,000 yuan. We aren't talking venture capital. This was family savings and high-interest loans from the gray market. If this tanked, they weren't just filing for bankruptcy. They were destroying their families. Their factory was a basement. No ventilation, no safety gear. Just 4 university-educated men mixing chemicals by hand, choking on fumes in the dark. It was messy work. They tried selling sheep, failed. Tried chemical trading, failed. They finally found traction with welding materials. It was a smart play. The startup cost for a flux factory was low, but China's rusting industrial base was desperate for repairs. Plus, Liang and Mao knew metallurgy. That technical know-how was the barrier that kept the amateurs out. The breakthrough was the 105 solder. Welding copper and bronze is a nightmare. It oxidizes and the heat disperses too fast. Mao developed a formula that fixed the tensile strength and cut down the dust. They got a state-owned factory to test it. It held. They made 8,000 yuan. Not a fortune, but it proved a point. A private basement workshop could outperform the state suppliers. This birthed their motto: quality changes the world. Make the product so good they have to buy it, regardless of who you are. But Liang saw the next wave coming: concrete. China was starting to build up, but 90% of the pumps were imports. The market belonged to the German giants, Putzmeister and Suing. To fight them, the team left the village. By 1994, they had incorporated as SANY Heavy Industry in the provincial capital, Changsha. Heavy machinery is a different animal than welding flux. We're talking high-pressure hydraulics and structure mechanics. The learning curve was brutal. Early prototypes in the skunkworks phase failed hard. Pipes burst, valves jammed under the load. The team had to eat bitterness, endure the suck. They realized they couldn't just copy the Germans. Why? Chinese concrete was garbage. It was full of coarse aggregate and varied in quality, which choked sensitive European machines. So they engineered a tractor, not a Ferrari. They built a high-pressure pump designed for the rough reality of the job site. It had 80% of the performance of a German unit, cost half as much, and it didn't clog on local mix. That was the moment the Basement 4 stopped being a rural workshop and started being a serious industrial threat. Most guys would have cashed out. The welding factory was printing money and the founders were set for life. But Liang Wengen looked at those welding rods and realized they were just consumables. He didn't want to make the glue. He wanted to build the beast that needed it. In 1994, they made the call. They packed up, moved from the sticks to the provincial capital Changsha, and rebranded as SANY. The name wasn't random. It means three ones: to build a first-class enterprise, foster first-class talent, and make a first-class contribution. With the new name came a new target: heavy construction machinery. At the time, a Chinese job site was a showroom for foreign iron. Japan, the US, and especially Germany ran the show. Putzmeister was the undisputed king. Their pumps were precise engineering marvels. The idea that a private Chinese shop could challenge them was a joke. The specific battleground was the hydraulic concrete pump. This is the heart of the site. You're pushing tons of wet, heavy slurry hundreds of feet vertically. It demands massive pressure and perfect seals. If that pump quits, the concrete sets inside the pipe. You don't just lose time, you have to jackhammer out the entire line. It's a catastrophe. SANY jumped in with zero street cred. They had to prove a domestic machine could take a beating that German engineering shrugged off. For years, they chased the teacher, Putzmeister. It wasn't pretty. Engineers slept on the factory floor, tweaking hydraulic valves and testing steel alloys until they broke. They weren't just trying to copy the Germans, they were trying to survive the environment. See, German machines were built for German concrete, clean, consistent mix. Chinese concrete was dirty and inconsistent. It chewed up delicate European hydraulics. The turning point was the HBT-90C trailer pump. This wasn't a clone, it was an adaptation. SANY built a mule that could eat inconsistent aggregate and keep pumping. It lacked the finesse of a Putzmeister, but it didn't quit when the mix got rough. That reliability turned the tide. Years later, that same core technology would power the pour for the Shanghai Tower. But in the short term, it proved the student was catching up to the master. On July 3, 2003, SANY went public on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. The team that started with a basement full of welding flux were now billionaires in Chinese RMB and on the fast track to a global fortune. But in heavy industry, success puts a target on your back. While SANY was celebrating the IPO, a storm was brewing across town in Changsha. A state-backed rival was watching, and they weren't interested in market share. They were looking for a fight. In the industrial gut of Changsha, the situation wasn't just a rivalry, it was a standoff. On one side, you had SANY, the Basement Four. They were private, agile, and hungry. Across town sat Zoomlion. They were state-backed, massive, and moved with the weight of the government behind them. For a while, they managed an uneasy truce. SANY was the scrappy underdog, Zoomlion was the establishment. But in 2008, the balance broke. The global financial crisis hit. Beijing dropped a massive 4 trillion yuan stimulus package to keep the gears turning. Suddenly, the market was flooded with infrastructure contracts. It wasn't just business anymore, it was a zero-sum game for dominance, and it got dirty fast. This wasn't just about underbidding on jobs, it turned into full-blown paranoia. SANY executives were convinced their blueprints were walking out the back door and landing on Zoomlion desks. Accusations started flying. SANY claimed their offices were bugged. They said they were being hit with smear campaigns to make them look corrupt. Zoomlion fired back, claiming SANY was using hackers to crack their internal bidding systems. The atmosphere in Changsha turned toxic. It was a war of surveillance, hackers, and spies. Then, in July 2010, lines were crossed. This wasn't about patents anymore, it was about blood. Liang, Liang Wengen's son and the heir to the company, was driving through Changsha. His vehicle was intercepted. SANY security called it a coordinated snatch operation. They managed to repel the attempt, but the message was loud and clear. Nobody was safe. The police never officially pinned it on Zoomlion, but the SANY founders didn't need a police report to know the score. Liang Wengen realized he couldn't win this fight. You can't beat a state-linked giant on their home turf. The field in Hunan was tilted against them, so in 2012 he pulled the plug. It was, for all intents and purposes, a midnight move. They were pulling headquarters out of Changsha and heading north to Beijing. The logic was simple: get under the nose of the central government and get away from the provincial knife fight. Liang put it bluntly, "I can't afford to offend them, but I can afford to hide from them." But here's the kicker. While they were dodging spies and lawsuits at home, their iron was building a legend overseas. In 2010, the world was watching the San Jose mine in Chile. 33 miners were trapped half a mile down. The rock was hard, the pressure was immense, and the margin for error was zero. The rescue team needed a machine that offered zero compromise on stability to serve as the ultimate failsafe. They didn't pick an American or German unit for the job. They picked a SANY SCC 4000 crawler crane. While a specialized winch performed the final vertical pull, the SANY crane was designated the Guardian. It ran the critical rehearsals and stood sentinel over the hull, ready to take the load if the primary systems failed. When the cameras rolled, the world saw the SANY logo standing tall on the site. They weren't seen as paranoid litigants down there. They were the engineering backbone of a global rescue. It was a strange split, fighting for survival in China, standing guard in the Andes. They proved the hardware could take the pressure, but 2011 was around the corner, and the world was about to ask for something much harder than just lifting power. While corporate spies were chasing the Four Musketeers out of Changsha, a much uglier situation was breaking across the East China Sea. March 11, 2011, the Tohoku earthquake slams Japan. The tsunami hits the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, knocks out the generators, and kills the cooling systems. The reactors started to cook. The Japanese authorities hit a logistical wall. The radiation levels near the cores were lethal. They needed to inject seawater from above to cool the spent fuel pools, but traditional fire trucks were useless. Their ladders were too short to clear the blown-out containment buildings, and if you sent a crew close enough to aim a hose, they wouldn't come back. TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, put out a desperate call to the global engineering community. The specs were impossible. They needed a pump with a boom long enough to reach over the reactor walls, precise enough to hit the target, and crucially, it had to be remote controlled. Germany's Putzmeister had the gear, but shipping it from Europe would take too long. Time was the one thing Japan didn't have. SANY didn't wait for an invitation. Sitting on their lot in Changsha was a 200-foot truck-mounted concrete pump. It was built for skyscrapers, but the specs fit the nightmare scenario perfectly. Liang Wengen made the call. When the Japanese utility asked for a price, Liang told them to keep their money. He was donating it. It was a massive gamble. If that hydraulic system seized up or the boom collapsed on live TV while the whole world watched, SANY's reputation would melt down right alongside the reactor. SANY engineers pulled an all-nighter modifying the remote systems so the operator could stand safely outside the red zone. They rushed the rig to Shanghai, loaded it onto a ferry, and sent it straight into the exclusion zone. The Japanese press called it the Big Giraffe. When it arrived, it deployed that 200-foot boom like a robotic arm, reaching right over the wreckage of Unit 4, and it worked. The pump poured tons of seawater directly onto the overheating fuel rods, bringing the temperature down and stabilizing the site. That moment did something a marketing budget never could. It proved that SANY wasn't just building cheap knockoffs. They were building machines that worked when the air was radioactive, and the stakes were life or death. That win gave Liang Wengen the confidence to make the boldest move of his life. For 20 years, the Four Musketeers had been chasing one company, Putzmeister. Back in Eichtal, Germany, Putzmeister was the Rolls-Royce of the industry. They were the teacher, SANY was the student. Their logo was an elephant, heavy, strong, unbreakable. But while SANY was cash-heavy from the China boom, the German giant was still hurting from the 2008 financial crisis. In January 2012, less than a year after Fukushima, Liang dropped the hammer. SANY, backed by CITIC PE, announced they were acquiring Putzmeister for $420 million. The news went down like a lead balloon in Germany. 700 workers in Eichtal marched in the streets. They were terrified. The narrative was simple. The Chinese upstarts were going to strip the patents, fire the locals, and ship the tooling back to Hunan. But Liang played the long game. He flew to Germany and looked the workforce in the eye. He made a simple promise. No layoffs. No factory closures. He called it a merger of the dragon and the elephant. He kept his word. SANY didn't gut Putzmeister. They used the acquisition to legitimize themselves. They instantly bought a global distribution network that would have taken 30 years to build from scratch. Overnight, SANY went from a Chinese heavyweight to a true multinational. The welding flux startup finally owed the highest level of engineering heritage in the world. By 2015, the Four Musketeers had secured the best hardware on the planet. They had the factories, the German precision, and the global reach. But looking at the assembly lines, they realized better steel and stronger hydraulics weren't going to be enough to stay on top. A new resource was becoming more valuable than concrete. The machines of the future couldn't just pump, they needed to think. SANY had conquered the hardware. Now they had to figure out how to harvest the data inside the engines. And the answer to that problem wasn't in a factory. It was in a new kind of facility, rising in the suburbs of Beijing. If you walk into SANY's Nankao Industrial Park in Changsha today, you're stepping into a different world. The World Economic Forum calls it a lighthouse factory, but the guys on the floor call it a dark factory. Why? Because robots don't need lights. Inside the massive halls of factory number 18, the overheads are often deemed optional. Robots handle the welding, the assembly, and the heavy lifting without a single pair of human eyes watching the arc. Automated guided vehicles slide across the floor carrying tons of steel, navigating a grid that switches heavy equipment models instantly. They swapped human muscle for 5G and algorithms. The result is terrifying speed. When the construction cycle heats up, SANY doesn't get stuck in the supply chain bottlenecks that choke giants like Caterpillar or Komatsu. They just open the tap and flood the market with iron. But fast robots are only half the battle. The real revolution is under the hood. SANY built a digital nervous system called Root Cloud. When a customer buys an excavator today, they aren't just buying hydraulics and a diesel engine. They're buying a data node. Sensors deep in the transmission, the hydraulic pumps, and the engine block are constantly screaming performance data back to headquarters. We're talking about 850,000 machines wired into one global network. That data killed the old run-to-failure maintenance model. Now, engineers in Beijing can see a hydraulic pump overheating in a Brazilian mine before the operator even smells the smoke. It turned maintenance into a predictive science, saving owners thousands in downtime. But it did something else too. It created the SANY Excavator Index. Because they monitor every scoop of dirt moved in China, they know the economy better than the government does. If crane hours drop in Shanghai, they know the real estate market is cooling before the official GDP report is even printed. This digital edge gave them the kill shot. For decades, the excavator market belonged to Caterpillar and Komatsu. They were the kings. But when the 2020 pandemic froze supply chains in the US and Europe, SANY's automated lines kept humming. They pressed the advantage. In 2020, SANY sold 98,705 excavators. They captured 15% of the global market. After 20 years of chasing, they finally did it. They took the global unit sales crown from Caterpillar. They had beaten the oldest names in the business at their own game. But just as they secured the throne in the age of heavy iron and diesel, the ground shifted. The industry is pivoting to batteries. To survive, SANY launched their 3 transformation strategy: globalization, digitalization, decarbonization. But as they look to push electric machines into Europe and North America, the welcome mat is being pulled. Western governments don't see them as just competitors anymore. They see a strategic threat, and the trade walls are starting to go up. In 2023, the era of the Four Musketeers came to a close. Liang Wengen, the man who went from selling sheep to running a basement welding shop, handed over the keys. He set up a rotating chairman system to keep the leadership fresh and stepped back. But he didn't leave the company looking in the rearview mirror at the diesel glory days. He pointed them toward the next fight: electrification. While the rest of the industry was still debating if heavy electric gear was feasible, SANY was putting it on the road. The skeptics always said the same thing: batteries are too heavy. They said you couldn't haul a full load across a city, let alone a country. SANY's answer was the Magic Tower 1165. That number isn't random. It stands for 1,165 kilowatt hours of battery capacity. To put that in perspective, that is 10 times the size of the biggest Tesla battery pack. It sounds like a fantasy weapon, but the specs are very real. Real enough to land in the Guinness Book of World Records. They took this electric semi-truck from Changsha to Shenzhen, a journey of 508 miles, on a single charge. To put that in perspective, that's London to Aberdeen or San Diego to Sacramento without stopping for a plug. This wasn't a computer simulation. This was rubber on the road. They proved the combustion engine isn't the undisputed king of long haul anymore. But just as the tech hit the red line, they hit a wall, a political one. As SANY pushes these electric excavators, wind turbines, and record-breaking trucks abroad, Western governments have stopped looking at them as just another competitor. They started seeing a systemic threat. The narrative flipped. 10 years ago, the knock against Chinese gear was that it was cheap junk. Now, the fear is that it's technologically superior and priced so low that local factories can't survive the fight. That anxiety triggered a wave of defense measures. In 2024, the EU and the UK launched heavy anti-dumping investigations. The UK slapped duties ranging from 18 to 40% on Chinese excavators. The accusation is that SANY is selling at unfairly low prices to kill European manufacturing. It's a hell of a catch-22. SANY spent 30 years chasing German engineering. They bought Putzmeister, mastered the hydraulics, and integrated top-tier battery tech. Now that they're winning the race, they're being penalized for it. They aren't the cheap knockoff anymore. They are the leader, and that puts a target on their back. The private giant is now navigating a fractured world. A superior machine might be banned simply because of the flag stamped on the engine block. Yet the numbers don't lie. By 2024, international revenue climbed to 64% of their total income. But if Western governments think SANY will just roll over, they've forgotten history. This isn't the first time Liang Wengen has clashed with Washington. Back in 2012, SANY affiliates bought a wind farm project in Oregon. The problem was it sat near a naval weapons training facility. The U.S. government blocked the deal on national security grounds, and President Obama personally signed the order to kill it. Usually, that's where the story ends. A foreign company cuts its losses and goes home. Liang did the opposite. He sued President Obama. It sounded insane. A private Chinese construction company dragging the U.S. commander-in-chief into federal court? But they argued they were denied due process. They refused to back down and, against all odds, they won a settlement. They cleared their name and recouped their investment. It proved that a private outfit from Hunan could stand toe-to-toe with the White House and not blink. This brings us back to the core of the story. When you step back, this is one of the most unlikely runs in industrial history. Usually, Chinese industrial titans are state-owned giants with infinite government funding and a safety net. SANY was different. Liang Wengen and his three friends started with nothing but an idea to make better welding materials. They quit the iron rice bowl, those guaranteed state jobs, and risked poverty in a rural basement. They failed at selling sheep. They failed at selling liquor. But they didn't fail at building an empire. Now think about the odds. They fought a brutal civil war with state-backed Zoomlion, surviving wiretaps, snatch teams, and TextGate. They moved their headquarters in the dead of night to escape the provincial infighting. They acquired Putzmeister, taking stewardship of the German engineering they once idolized. And when the Fukushima reactor was melting down, it was their machine, Big Giraffe, that answered the call. Today, SANY stands as a testament to sheer commercial grit. They used lighthouse factories to turn heavy iron into smart data. As trade wars heat up and the world splits into blocks, SANY remains a titan too big to ignore. They proved that with enough determination, four friends in a basement really can build the machines that build the world. SANY doesn't fit the standard script for Chinese industry. They didn't have the bottomless pockets of the state or the safety net of the iron rice bowl. They started in a shed with some welding rods and a refusal to quit. They outran the state-backed giants in their own backyard. They stopped copying German legends and bought them instead. From the basement floor to the magic tower, they proved that a private outfit could muscle its way to the top of the food chain through sheer engineering grit. Now they're hitting new walls, trade wars and tariffs, but they've built a titan that is simply too big to ignore. They went from a rural workshop to the heavy equipment heavyweight of the world. What's your take? Can SANY navigate the trade bans, or have they hit their ceiling? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories from the iron trade, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.